Last night, your Dallas Mavericks took the series lead against Oklahoma City 3-2 in a 104-92 victory. Now the Dallas Mavericks are now one game away from reaching the Western Conference Finals. Welcome to another episode of Bleav In Mavs with Mo Murphy. As always, I am your host, Mo Murphy. The Bleav In Mavs podcast brought to you by the Bleav Sports Network. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We appreciate everybody for listening. But the Dallas Mavericks won 104-92 last night in a pivotal game 5 against OKC. Dallas needed this win. It was on the road, obviously, but they needed this win. They needed to go up 3-2. And last night was a heck of a performance. But I want to talk about one person first. I want to talk about Derrick Jones Jr. Now, shout out to Derrick Jones Jr. Last night, he had his playoff career high with 19 points. But here's what I want to talk about. So he had his career high in playoffs points in game 4 with 17. Outdoes it in game 5 with 19. Obviously, and I guess you could say a much bigger game. We were up 2-1. The series is tied 2-2 after game 4. This is to take the series lead and be one game away, heading back to the crib to make the Western Conference Finals. And Derrick Jones Jr. showed up in a big way, having his best game of his career in the playoffs up to this point. But here's where I want to give him his flowers. So leading up to the day yesterday, obviously, there's a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot of reports. So Derrick Jones Jr. is like our lone upcoming free agent on this roster. And so there were reports coming out that basically Derrick Jones Jr. wants to stay in Dallas. And I love when players want to stay where they're at, may not entertain free agency. Maybe you'll entertain free agency in order to gauge their value, come back to the team that they want to play for. Maybe there's a home team discount, okay, I'm already on the roster. Maybe I'll take a little bit of discount. But here's the thing. He could have let that be a distraction. He could have let his impending free agency be a distraction. Maybe they're not having contract talks. Maybe they are, but that could have been a distraction. That comes out. And the best way to prove that you want to be with an organization, that you want to continue to play for an organization, is just don't talk about it. Just play ball. And so Derrick Jones Jr. comes into game 5 and just plays ball. Had 15 points in the first half. 6 for 6 was perfect from the field. Finishes with 19. So yeah, he has 15 finishes with 19. You'd love a little more of a second half scoring outburst. But when you come out of a game 5 and you win and you're up 3-2, you can start picking apart your play, positive or negative. But at the end of the day, you got the victory. And so for Derrick Jones Jr. to basically understand that he's an upcoming free agent and like my game is going to do the talking. He wants to be in Dallas and he's showing his worth in the games that matter. Like these games matter. In a game 5, it matters. It's not like he shows up in a game 1 and disappears for the rest of the series. And we could be sitting here down 3-2 wondering, man, if Derrick Jones Jr. had played a lot better or other role players. And we'll talk about a couple of them as well. And we'll also talk about our superstar of the night in Luka Doncic. But just for Derrick Jones Jr. to have basically told Mavs Nation that he wants to stay in Dallas and then show it in the past 2 games in his play. Like, I love when players do that. And so now you gauge what his value is and you gauge how valuable he is to this team. Now, another role player I do want to talk about that I guess you could say cooled down a little bit yesterday was PJ Washington. But here's the thing about PJ Washington. So up until game 5, PJ Washington has basically played like an all-star caliber player, averaging 20 points, 7 or 8 rebounds, 3 or 4 assists a game. So he's played like an all-star, like a friend, borderline all-star player. This is what happens, and people are surprised. People act like PJ Washington was this bum that Dallas traded for. And I'm not talking about, when I talk about people, I'm not talking about the Mavericks fans. I'm not talking about what people thought with the trade in Mavericks Nation. I'm just talking about people around the association thought like, okay, it's PJ Washington. This isn't a major upgrade. This isn't a move that makes Dallas so much better, but it does. And that's what happens when good players play winning basketball. This isn't the Charlotte Hornets. This is the Dallas Mavericks. And when they made those moves at the trade deadline, you're seeing them come into fruition. Dallas wants to win. Dallas is trying to win a championship. They addressed that when they went to the trade deadline and tried to address their biggest flaws. And it is coming now in such a positive effect. Like, I really think because of the move, had the Mavericks not made the moves at the trade deadline that they made for Gafford and PJ Washington, I don't think they're sitting here up 3-2 with a chance of being able to go to the Western Conference Finals. So that's how important PJ Washington was. And I'm going to tell you, he didn't play the greatest offensively from a shooting standpoint yesterday. But there was a point in time in the fourth quarter where PJ Washington has been hot throughout this. And there was a point in time where he wasn't hitting much. OKC goes on a little run. OKC's down by like 7 or 8. I forget exactly, but it was 7 or 8. And Luka finds PJ Washington wide open in the corner. Dallas wasn't able to get much going offensively through that stretch. And then PJ Washington, when it seems like OKC is going to be able to really get into this league, PJ Washington hits the corner 3. They go up 10. OKC calls a timeout. So it did seem like you wanted to see some better things offensively from maybe a Kyrie Irving or PJ Washington. I think Derrick Jones Jr. held it down. I think Derek Lively played really well, and Gafford. And we'll talk about them in a second. But PJ Washington, he hit the shot when you needed him to. Like, you're tied 2-2 with the way PJ Washington is playing, and this isn't your superstar player, you know. So in a game like a game 5, you more expect going into that game. They're leaning on Luka, they're leaning on Kyrie. PJ, you've done enough up to this point. If you have an off night, and no player like a PJ Washington is worried about what my role is and whether it's okay for me to have an off night or not. So I'm not saying that's PJ's mindset. I'm just saying, like, as a superstar, you kind of be like, okay, well, PJ's held it down. It's my turn. Like, we have an opportunity to take this game 5. It is now my turn. And that's what Luka did. But shout out to PJ Washington. Up to this point, he's been a pivotal factor in the reason why the Dallas Mavericks are up 3-2 right now. So salute to PJ Washington for what he did and being able to hit that shot, no matter how stale you were offensively, no matter if it was an off night, you still had the confidence to take the shot that you've been hitting constantly. You've been hitting that shot constantly up in this series up to this point. And the point still stands. Dallas has still outplayed OKC. Now they're up 3-2. This series really could be over, you know, and I think that's a hard pill for Mavericks fans to swallow. And I think we're all grasping it. I think the players understand, but they got the victory, took it up 3-2. Now they control their own destiny heading home. But this series really should be over. We shouldn't have lost game 4. It should have been a 4-1 series. Instead, we're going to go play game 6. Luka gets a few days rest, so I feel a lot more confident, especially after seeing what we saw from him in game 5. And this is what we saw from Luka in game 5. This is the difference between superstars in the NBA and role players. Like, and it's just no names. This is the difference, though. Luka's been looking hobbled. Luka hasn't looked healthy the entire series. Luka hasn't played the greatest offensively. Luka, when he looks like he does a step back or he shoots a deep 3, he doesn't have enough lift in his legs. You could tell his knees are bothering him. So when Luka goes to shoot these deep shots that we're accustomed to him making, or he shoots these fadeaway mid-range jumpers in the paint off the, you know, creating the separation, little step back, shoulder to the chest, step back. The fact that he hasn't been hitting those, he's not getting lift under his legs. This is the healthiest that Luka looked in a game in this OKC series up to this point. And shout out to Luka. Like, superstars show up when it matters. But Luka was out there and realized, like, instead of treating it like the most pressured game of my career that it could be, because if we lose this game, we're now down 3-2. We have to win another one. We have to win one at home and then win game 7 on the road. Like, that's the scenario that could have happened had we lost. Like, the only way we win is if we win game 6 and then win game 7 at OKC on the road. But instead of focusing on that point, it seemed like Luka just stepped out there and said, I'm a star player. You could tell this was, and don't get me wrong, I hate saying it like this because there were still points in time in the game where you could tell Luka was hobbled. But throughout the game for 4 quarters, I would say this is the healthiest that Luka has looked up to this point in the spurts in the game that he did. And he ended up having a 30-plus point triple-double. So Luka did what he does in the playoffs, having a 30-plus point triple-double. But he didn't focus on the refs. He just played through the flow of the game. And I think by game 5, the series is tied 2-2. You understand how the game's going to be called now. So Luka did a lot, especially in game 4, especially late down the stretch. You could tell there was probably more of a lot of frustration from his lack of being able to hit shots late down the stretch in game 4. But he was entertaining the refs in every call, every non-call. It seemed like his focus was so much on the refs and making the right call for Dallas or for, just a bunch of BS call. And that was Luka's focus, where in game 5, Luka's focus was winning this game, but having fun while doing it. It seemed like Luka was like, you know what? I'm going to step up. I'm going to play this game to the best of my ability. My body feels as good as it's going to feel in a game 5 in the second round. And so I'm going to show that, and hopefully that lays an effect on how we're able to win this game. And that was the case. Like I said, there were still spurts, and there were still some shots he took, still some, some plays he tried to make going to the hole where you could tell he's hobbled. Luka's not 100%, but it did seem like this was the healthiest he was, and he was able to put that on display last night, having a 30-plus point triple-double. And here's the thing about Luka. Like, I know offensively, the man played amazing. He shot well. But Luka, the way he's played defensively, I think is not going to get enough credit. And because of a guy like Luka, they want to bash him so bad. People want to bash Luka. They want to find the flaw in his game. And so the few plays, especially with him being injured as of late, so the few plays where you catch him, the guy beats him, so he just kind of turns like a turnstile and isn't really effective defensively. But then look at some of the plays where he is effective defensively. You win games because of that. Like last night, Luka gets a block on SGA, plays aggressive help side defense, and was able to get the block. And that's something that you're not necessarily accustomed to Luka doing, is playing really, really well defensively. But I think that's the major success on why the Dallas Mavericks are up 3-2 in this series, and hopefully being able to secure game 6 and find a way to get to the Western Conference Finals and hopefully get past the Western Conference Finals and get to the finals and compete for a championship. But you could tell Luka's bought in defensively too. And sometimes that superstar player won't necessarily fully commit to what the system that the rest of the team is running, because, sometimes especially those defensive schemes, no matter how good a team is defensively, a lot of times if their star player isn't that great of a defender, then the system works around the fact of being able to hide that person defensively. But they haven't done that with Luka, and you don't have to hide him defensively when he puts in effort. Luka plays really good defense. He was able to block SGA late in the game. So there were a lot of things Luka did defensively really up through this series. Now, when we talk about Kyrie Irving, we still waiting for one of these explosive offensive performances. Now, I have questions, but this is only for me to question and maybe get answers in a press conference or something like that. But this question isn't for me to raise eyes and have people looking crazy as if I'm the expert on the X's and O's, because there's a reason why you're listening to me break down and talk about the game on this Bleav In Mavs show, as opposed to the question I have for the head coach, which is Jason Kidd. They are up 3-2. So, we're up 3-2. So whatever Dallas is doing schematically to basically try and win this series, it's working. It may not work 100% effective. It may not look the way you want it to look as a fan. I just wonder what got into Jason Kidd for this series to basically the game plan, at least on the offensive, just for Kyrie Irving, period, was basically commit to the defensive side of the ball, be more so of a playmaker, like a traditional point guard, run the offense, play defense, and that's where your effect is going to come in this game. Now, I personally think Jason Kidd was able to kind of come up with that game plan because it makes the most sense. But if that stops working, Kyrie is one of those players that he could just go get 30. And so you kind of give him a role, but understand that if there's a guy who could play himself out of his role and be able to get a victory, it is Kyrie Irving. And it seems like he's just kind of played it almost seems like Kyrie Irving is Chris Paul, not the Kyrie Irving that we're used to seeing. And being a Chris Paul type player for your team right now, amidst being up 3-2 in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, isn't the world's worst thing, but it does seem like it's more of this traditional point guard approach. Commit to the defensive side of the ball, make plays, get your buckets when we need them, not necessarily when you need to, but when we need them. And that's how we'll go on to win this series. And so I would just love to hear the insight on what seems like that might have been Coach Kidd's kind of game plan going into the series, that might have been one of his major focal points because it's been that way since the beginning of the series. And we're like, man, this is Kyrie's masterclass tonight. Like, we keep, hopefully it comes. And maybe you don't need it to. Like, obviously you're up 3-2 without it, so maybe you don't need it to. And at the same time, I think this is a way of Coach Kidd, like, as long as we keep winning games and I can preserve a Kyrie Irving, Luka's only going to get more injured. Like, he's not going to get healthier as the playoffs go. So there's got to be ways of being able to keep Luka engaged. And maybe it's not unleashing Kyrie completely offensively, because you might need him in the Western Conference Finals when Luka's battered, or might have to miss, 7 to 8 minute stretch to make sure he can get himself back healthy on the sideline. And that's when you need Kyrie Irving to take over. So you want to make sure he has enough energy. You want to make sure he's healthy enough to be able to do that in this playoff run. And so I would just love to hear from Coach Kidd why that was his approach, but the approach is working. So I don't even want to be, there's no reason to be negative about it. Coach Kidd made some decisions. He a coach. And I'm sitting here on the Bleav In Mavs podcast explaining what I see, but there's a reason why I'm sitting in my seat, and there's a reason why he get paid and got his extension to sit in his seat. So it's not me questioning Jason Kidd. I have a question, but would be seeking the right answer if Jason Kidd and if he give me the answer that I don't expect, regardless of the fact, whatever decisions he's made as the head coach, and I don't think we give him enough flowers. Always focus on the negative with Jason Kidd. What he's done is Jason Kidd has done enough to make sure that his team is now in position to not buy their way, but win their way into appearing in the Western Conference Finals. And I think if Dallas does end up making it to the Western Conference Finals, they completely have a chance. I know I know Denver and Minnesota play tonight, and there's a possibility that we could find out who our opponent is going to be in the Western Conference Finals tonight if Denver handles business while being up 3-2 against Minnesota. But if I'm Dallas, I just win this game 6. I'm not concerned who I play, whether it's Denver, whether it's Minnesota. We have everything we need to get the job done. We got Luka and we got Kyrie. And so you got to be feeling pretty good coming off that Game 5 victory, being up 3-2 and heading into Game 6. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for listening. And we will catch you before Game 6, because Game 6 is 7 p.m. Local time in Dallas. Tip-off. I said kickoff. The football schedule release, it got me thinking football, but tip-off at 7 o'clock. So we will be talking throughout the day on Saturday. So make sure you tune in. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for listening. We will catch you on the next episode of Bleav In Mavs.